let's get started. Now, exactly a week ago, Finance Minister Ken Ofori-Atta presented the government's budget and economic policy for the year 2020. Now, he calls it the Nkoswaning Kabum budget, which he says contains plans to not spend excessively as has been done in previous election years. So, did the government really stick to the spending discipline it promised Ghanaians? Now that the dust has settled, we can take a closer look and analyze the content. And a careful study reveals the 2020 budget proposes a 21% increase in spending over the previous year. This morning, Send Ghana has been analyzing the budget statement. Now, here's what they found. Harriet Nyama Ajiman, Senior Programs Officer for Send Ghana, says this.
Today we have looked at 5 areas of the budget: education, health. We have looked at social protection, agriculture, and then overall, we have looked at the budget response to the SDGs. And generally, what we are saying is that our budget lacks credibility in terms of execution. Comparing it to previous budgets and how we have spent those monies, government has not performed well in terms of releasing what it has allocated to the various ministries to work with. What it means is that our execution rate is either too high for some areas and too low for some other sectors. So some other sectors are not getting the resources they require to work with, whilst others are overspending. It's also about information that you put out regarding why you could not meet your revenue targets, regarding why you could not release all resources to sectors that you have promised to support. With health, we have a levy from which we generate funds for the national health insurance. It is VAT, and you and I pay for it. And then those of us in the formal sector, our social security is also taking part of it to support NHIS. Government indicates how much we are expecting from these two sources and then allocates to the national health insurance. But the allocation is short of the total it has indicated it will collect. So the question is, where is that balance going? Because the budget does not say so, and that is a transparency and credibility issue.
Right, so in the studio for a conversation on this is former Deputy Finance Minister Kweku Ricketts-Hagan. In the next hour, we're going to explore a few of the themes that have emerged from the budget. It's good to see you, sir.
Good to see you,
Thank
my
you
brother.
for your time.
Good to see you.
Right, so shortly, your party members in Parliament are going to state their position on the budget at a forum. But since we've got you here, why don't we get you started? What are your thoughts on the budget?
Well, thank you very much for being here today. And I should say good afternoon to those who are watching us and those who are listening to us. I think the expectation, that I think most of us have had over the years is that this government has basically, they've talked a good talk, but then when it comes to delivery, they are found wanting. So I think in terms of the budget we got this time, it is no different from what we have received in previous years. Full of talking, but very little actually gets done. And then the following year, they will load more promises, and then again, you don't see anything. I'm not saying they haven't done anything, but then they haven't done as much as was expected of them.
Right.
And they have talked a good game, as I said, but they've not been able to deliver. And I think they made some statements when they were in opposition. And I think that is what is basically, what is caught up with them. And they don't want to come clean. I mean, government is not easy. We've been there before. And sometimes, I'm a bit, sympathetic to what, you have to go through. I've been at the Ministry of Finance. I have seen and been part of preparation of budget. You are being pulled basically in all directions. And at the end of the day, you need to be able to satisfy all corners of your economy to make sure that you actually get the economy growing. So it's a tough act. And I think they underestimated certain things. And now they've come into office, and they are having serious challenges. I mean, they've been able to, some of their flagship, things they talked about, free education and others that they make a lot of noise about, which we all agree are good things. Our problem has always been how it was planned and implemented. If you come to the banking sector to do with banking cleanup, we all agree that some level of cleaning up was needed in the banking sector. Again, the manner in which it was done is what has created problem, where we felt some banks could have been saved, especially the indigenous bank, because the president was talking, I think a couple of days ago, about how he wants to promote entrepreneurship, especially with the youth. And I'm asking myself, if I'm a young man wanting to become an entrepreneur by setting up a bank, if I look at the examples listed, on the field about Ghanaian young people who have created banks and the banks have been collapsed, what motivation really do I have as a young person to dream of ever setting up a bank and possibly taking it global, as has been done by, our friends across the border in Nigeria, where some of these banks are actually, benefiting here or employing people here.
To be fair, though, I mean, every bank involved in the banking crisis was an indigenous one. So, I mean, which one should they have closed and which one should they not have?
Well, we can have that argument. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and say that this one should be open, this one should be closed. It needs to be examined properly. But on what I see and what I have examined, I know a number of banks could have been saved.
Name one.
Well, I don't think that would be fair, for me to name one bank. But I'm telling you that the 9 banks, the 9 universal banks that got collapsed, probably we could have saved about 3 or 4 out of the 9.
But how about the hundreds of microfinance?
Well, I mean, can you really think about it? I mean, I don't think we look at the the enormity of the whole thing. Within a short span of 2 years, this government and the central bank have closed 9 universal banks, 347 microfinance institutions, 39 microcredit ones, savings and loans and finance houses, 23, 15 savings and loans and that. And recently, 53 fund managers. Look, the banking sector or the financial system is basically the anchor or what feeds the real economy. That's where we get liquidity from. That is where money goes round. So if in a short space of time, this started in August 2017, so 2 years, you have closed 473 small, medium, large financial institutions.
The majority of them, though, were kind of not all in operation, and they were shut down for that reason.
Well, I mean, have they shut themselves down, or you still shut them down? It's you saying that they are not doing anything, but really,
none of them have objected. If indeed they were not doing anything, then it makes no difference to the market, does it?
When the regulator shut you down, I mean, especially if you're a small player, how loud can you shout? And they have moved the responsibility from the regulators themselves, who, in my mind, and then as a former banker, see that that's where the problem is, that they were weak in their supervision, they were weak in the general, regulation, of the banks. Some banks, in terms of the way the whole recapitalization was even done. Some banks, I don't know if you heard Monday I was calling for NIB's license to be downgraded, because the finance minister is saying that they want NIB to become a specialized bank and be able to do industrialization. If the bank is going to be used that way, then the bank doesn't need a universal license. The 400 million that the central bank is asking universal licenses to pay, and that money is for universal license. You can simply cure the NIB issue by just downgrading it, so they don't fall in the category of paying 400 million. Then you can turn it to the specialized bank you're talking about. You don't come to Parliament and ask us for 2.2 billion through this GATT, which is also another, basically, a very poor tool, and save us the trouble of having to approve 2.2 billion to save a bank that, in the end, needs to be downgraded to become a development bank, a commercial bank, investment bank, whichever way you want to call it.
Okay.
And move away from, because when we approve that money, it goes into the bank, and the bank will put it, because as a universal bank, you have a diversified portfolio. Some of them are useless portfolios. It will go in there and the money will disappear again. Streamline it and make it a strategized risk. Sit in one place, development, industrialization, or whatever. Those are the things that we are talking about. And this is how NIB, for instance, can be saved. In the end, we'll realize that we'll go down the road and then NIB, they have to add it to GCB.
All right. So that's your assessment of their performance in the past year. Let's look to the future. One of the things they promised was that for the first time, we're not going to overspend in an election year. Now, are we being fair to them if we say that at least when it comes to expenditure, they have not done badly in the past? So is it fair to expect that they ought to be able to stick to the target they set for themselves?
It is fair, could you? It is. We have to be, but you have to put it in context. Because the whole fiscal discipline thing did not start with this government. It started with the NDC under John Mahama, where he took the country to the IMF. The reason we
Why is that important? I mean, we're talking about whether we can,
all right, let me save
money next year.
I'm building a story for you why
Okay.
it is important.
Okay.
Because the thing started from a source. What did we go to the IMF for? We went to the IMF for basically to be able to get this kind of fiscal discipline that we are talking about, and also credibility in the things that we are doing. It is under that program that these disciplines were put in place as to not spending what you don't have, borrow less, and all those things started from. NPP came to office and continued it to a fruitful conclusion. And that set the tone. It is a platform upon which the whole Fiscal Responsibility Act was built. So that is the premise from where this is coming from. So they have come and taken it over and they are carrying it forward. So somebody started, they have done their bit. My only hope is that as a country, we keep that discipline and not derail and having to go down. Every government, when they go to IMF, we go to IMF for many times, they say, oh, that's the last one, we won't go again. And then something happens and we go there again. I hope. And look, NDC, perhaps, His Excellency John Dramani probably lost an election partly on taking Ghana to the IMF. But it was necessary at the time for it to be done. And the fruits of that is what this current government is enjoying. I'm not saying they haven't contributed to it, but my fear is that this could derail. The reason I'm saying this is this. When you look at the Fiscal Responsibility Act of 5% that we put in place, which we all have to, and it has consequences, even the finance minister can lose his job and face further, But in an election year, that is where most of the things start from. The overspending and all that, because you have your people demanding things that you should have, or they think you should have done earlier. And people will say, if we don't get a polytank you promise us, we are not voting. If we don't get a road, we are not doing this. It is not surprising that in this budget, the government talks about the year of roads. I mean, you don't run an economy where you have the year of this, the year of that. It's a juggling act. They need to go together.
But you must have priorities.
You must have priorities.
So if they name the year to indicate their priority?
For me, one of the critical infrastructures in any economy is roads.
Then year of roads is a good idea.
Well, so
is it
now
not?
3 years into the administration, we've got to the year of roads. And the year of roads, they are going to build 150 roads. Unfortunately, we don't know the sizes of the road, whether it's 100 kilometers per each road or 150 they are talking about. Across the country, 16 regions, though they missed a region and they have recaptured that region back. Now, when you look at the money available, you realize that it doesn't add up. Because even with the sino-hydro that they talk about, we will not be able to build the roads that they are talking about. Secondly, if you look at the budget itself, and I have the budget here, you realize that the road fund, where roads are built from, or partly built from, the allocation that is there, which is the tax revenue we put there, the 1.7 billion that was put there, 100 billion is what has been made available.
100 million.
100, yes, has been made available. Well, 1 billion is 1.7.
Okay. So 1 billion has been made available.
So 700 million is not there. So this is basically, they have deprived themselves already of 700 million. When you look at the ministry responsible for roads and highways, its allocation on capital expenditure, and their capital expenditure is roads, is 1.2 billion. If you just add the two together, even if I don't take the 700 million out, that's just a little under 3 billion. It will not do the job. So you are not quite sure where they are going to get the money.
You mean that's not enough to build 150 roads?
No, definitely not. I mean, that's what I'm saying. Maybe they should, since they keep moving the goalposts. You know, when they started 1D, 1F, now we don't know what size of 1D and 1F we are talking about. So it could end up being, you know, what is it called, half a kilometer of road for each of the 150. There may be, perhaps, but if you are talking about roads as we know it, minimum maybe 100 kilometers of roads, then that money is woefully inadequate.
All right, so according to you, it's not a year of roads then. But I'm still keen on the idea of keeping expenditure down.
Yeah.
I mean, they are certain about this rather lofty objective of not overspending in an election year. Now, you've talked about the dangers. Everybody wants something.
Yeah. And it's the dangers that leads to overspending.
Yeah.
That feeds the deficit and becomes a problem.
But, I mean, when your party was in government, you did not succeed in sticking to expenditure targets in an election year. So, to be fair,
well, I think the overrun was about 3% or so.
So there was an overrun.
Yeah, it was an overrun.
That's right.
Yes.
So I mean, to be fair, if we're having a discussion about whether or not we can stick under budget, do you feel that you and your party are best qualified to tell us whether or not we can do it and how to do it?
If you look at things progressively, if you go back election after election, probably 2004 is the only exception.
Yeah.
We've always had overruns. And if you compare with what we had in 2016 with the past, in fact, 2016 was the smallest. So it tells you that, you know, we've been coming down on that. So we do hope that continues, and then under them they can do better because of where we are coming from, the painful IMF and all that we've been through, that we don't get to a situation where in a knee-jerk reaction, trying to satisfy the electorates, try to do certain things haphazardly without those things being properly planned for proper execution. The history of the things they've implemented is a clear indication that things could get out of hands. Free education, fantastic idea. Nobody is challenging that. Whether we said progressively or what, it's in the constitution that when things are right, we should. One party decides that it can be done now, no problem. But the planning and the implementation is where the problem is. So if the planning and implementation in terms of these roads in an election year is not done properly, where every region you have promised them road will be demanding it before the election, possibly, then you run the danger of having to look for money elsewhere. And that is where the overspending is. You will either overspend and put your hand up that you have, or you will overspend and decide to massage the figures so that you stay within the 5%. This is where the fear is. In fact, if they can put their hands up and say that we have, rather than massage figures, to stay within that, because look, the debt will be there and it will catch up with us. And that is my fear, that the 5% we will exceed it, but we will do everything possible, like they're doing at the moment. The bailout money, or the money they use, the 16 billion they use in collapsing bank, they've decided that those are not going to be part of expenditure. But any benefits or gains that came from that they have identified or crystallized, that can go with revenue. If you do that, naturally what you are doing is that you are suppressing your expenditure and let your revenue, No, you are actually doing the other way. You are letting your suppressing your expenditure and let your revenue go up. So revenue expenditure is where your deficit comes from. So if you are suppressing one and you are letting the other one lose, then you are artificially reducing the deficit. That is where the fear is.
Right.
So they could get things like they are doing something that is debt. They say it's not debt. Sino hydro is a barter trade. Something that's a deficit. They say no, it's not deficit. They've come. They want to raise 2.2 million for GATS. We say that look, you come back with sovereign guarantee, because if you're going to do sovereign guarantee, then it's debt. Unless you can prove to us that you have some partial risk guarantee given to you by ID or somebody to mitigate the risk. They've been taken to court. They come up with put call option. I mean, what is a put call option? It's another contingent liability, just like the sovereign guarantee. And conditional what is it called? Contingent liability is payable from state coffers,
right,
when they become due.
Well, I mean, so in the coming year, if what you're saying is right,
yeah,
and the expectation is that they are going to be overwhelmed by the demands of the people, and so no matter what expenditure
we'll
is
be demanding our road in Cape Coast.
Indeed, as I can well imagine, then perhaps the solution would be for them to exceed their revenue targets. Any hope of that?
That is where the problem is, and that has been a problem that's been going on for years. It's not peculiar to this particular government, but over the years, and the question has always been, do we set over-ambitious target for revenue without actually having the necessary tools to do that? We always talk about expanding the network. The usual language you hear,
widening the
tax net.
Nobody has been able to widen it.
Yeah. You know, informal economy, formalizing all those things we're talking about. There have been so many reforms over the years. And we need to look at the revenue, you know, whether it's NDC or MPP, whoever is in power, we need to look at realistic revenue that this economy can attract and make sure that those who are not paying taxes, what incentives do they really need for we to be able to rope them in? And not overburden the few people who always pay, like yourselves, who pay your taxes and you can easily be traced, and therefore you pay more when there are any new taxes. That is one. But if you are not getting the money, then you have to rationalize your expenditure. You see, so if you are pursuing what the economy, expansionary type of project, which as the economists will call it, when you don't have the money but you are spending, then you are definitely going to run into problems. So we need to look at what we are spending money on. I hope in the future we could move to some kind of a performance budget, where some of the programs we do in previous years actually get reviewed to see whether they are yielding the right benefit and impacting the economy. Because at the end of the day, it's not about how good your economic indicators or microeconomic indicators are. How do those indicators translate into the real economy where you and I live? That has always been the challenge.
So, now, when the finance minister was reading the budget, a number of items drew some interesting responses from the opposition.
Even today, when they are doing the agric interesting figures about farmers who have benefited from, I mean, there is a bit of, I mean, I don't want to go down the road on cooking figures and all that, but I think there's.
But why is there doubt over the figures? Because that was going to be my question. That a lot of funny reactions to the numbers.
Yeah.
Why is there doubt over the figures? Let's focus on the agriculture for a moment.
Well, I mean, the agriculture today, as I was in the house just before I came here, and the debate was going on. Third day, the debate is on agriculture, and some of the figures that the agriculture minister churned out today, which are supposed to be in the budget, are actually not consistent within the same budget. And when it was questioned, the answer was that he was talking about cumulative figures. You know, he was talking about cumulative, and if you're talking about cumulative figures, then you are not speaking to one data in one budget, because cumulative, it means you are building it up. So things need to be clear. You don't use cumulative figures to support your argument. It's like cherry picking when it suits you. And then when it doesn't, you will be using different things. Even old numbers, which is our numbers, they try to distort them to make us look very bad. When the deficit on 2016 is 7.8 on not on rebase, they say it's 9.3. How can 168.7 billion economy, which is the GDP at the time, over a 13.6 nominal figure of deficit, give you 9.3? It's 7.8. Even when you do rebasing, it becomes lower because your denominator becomes much bigger.
That's right.
Your GDP moves from 168 to 215, but your deficit still stays the same, nominal terms.
Yeah.
And that becomes 6.1. So for them to say that we had 9.3 and they've had this, look, that is not what is important now. You said you can fix it. Just get it done.
All right. So, what's your recommendation? What if the finance minister picked up the phone and called you and said, Mr. Ricketts-Hagan, look, give me your best tip. How do I make sure that we sail through 2020 safely, deliver an election, meet all of the requirements, including the massive projects for sort of public for the public good and so forth? What would your advice be?
Well, I think first and foremost, he needs to halt the banking and the financial crisis, because that is where actually the money, the liquidity in the system comes from. If our banks are not well capitalized, they are still undercapitalized. If our banks are not really solvent, but we are pretending they are, you have killed banks that were on their knees, saying that the rest that are left are better banks. And those banks are struggling. So if we don't hold that, we have already spent 16 billion to clean up this banking thing that we're doing. It's not actually a cleanup. It's a 16 billion to collapse banks. Okay, now when you look at the 16 billion, when you look at it in GDP terms, it might not look that huge, 5% of GDP. But GDP is not the actual money we are holding in our hand.
It's
the actual money we are holding in our hands is tax revenue. So what percentage of 16 billion is our tax revenue? And I can tell you our revenue, if we achieve it, is 45 billion. Therefore, if you have spent about 16 billion in bailing out banks or collapsing them, that is 36% of this hard-earned money we have been able to raise. So if you don't halt it now with the NIB and others that are still in the pipeline and still struggling, and cut your losses, as I'm saying, don't put any more money in NIB. Just downgrade their license. Diversify the portfolios that they have, which is not going to be their activities anymore, since they are not a universal bank. Get rid of those assets and realize some money. Don't give them 500 million and take their juicy assets in their portfolio like Nestle and say you have done a swap. What is the government doing swap with NIB for? What are they? They are holding the Nestle asset because they don't believe NIB can pay back, and therefore they want to use that as a hedge of the interest rate, or what? If NIB needs 400 million to recapitalize to meet the minimum capital requirement by Bank of Ghana, why don't you give the 500 million to them as an equity to recapitalize, but you give it to them as a loan? It just doesn't make sense. There's something not right. You create a Ghana amalgamated, that's another one that we should scrap completely.
Ghana Amalgamated Trust.
It doesn't make sense. First of all, you haven't brought it to Parliament for approval. Yet you have come to Parliament for Parliament to approve an arrangement or an agreement called put-call option. Government to approve it. Parliament. And we don't believe in that. We don't recognize it. So how can we approve a loan on its behalf? And the loan you are asking us to approve is a derivative, which means that anything at all can happen. You have a pool call option. Supposing it's even between GAT and investors, and GAT has the call, and the investors have the put. If we approve it, the put option can be exercised at any time. If the investors decide for something is wrong with the banking system, they want to call their put. It is actually an agreement that needs to be honored. So if they say we are selling, that's the right to sell, government is obliged to buy. And that's the contingent liability we're talking about. And that should be added to the national stock. And contingent liabilities, as I continue to say, is paid from you and I, our taxes.
Let's talk for a minute about the leakages. That's another way of
that's another huge one.
Yeah. Now, this government did a number of things. They did what they called rationalization of contracts. They went and looked at a great deal of contracts, and now that they are happy with whichever ones they're happy with, they're going to pay 85% of them, I believe.
Yeah, 80% of
80% of
the contractors.
Yes, of the contractors. Some would say these are things they've done which have saved the public purse quite a lot. Would you encourage more of that in coming years?
Well,
in the coming year?
I believe years back, you joined us in Senchi, and this thing started quite a while ago. You can talk about the frequency or the speed in which we were doing it. Anything that is moving in the positive direction has to be able to control the country's purse, should be encouraged. To weed out any leakages or any corruption and all those things should be encouraged. Look, human nature needs to be policed. Self-regulation and all that has not proven to work. Otherwise, you and I are civil people. We can live in this country and not cause anyone a problem, but we still need the police, just in case you or I misbehave. So we need to continue on that path. But you see, timing is everything. When you are running an economy, timing of when you do things is everything. If contractors have worked, they have dependent people who work for them. The workers have people who depend on them, and they have not been paid. Then basically you look along the whole chain, and you realize that there is no money in the system. And
but you had this problem when you were Deputy Finance Minister as well. How did you resolve it?
Well, that's what I'm saying, that contractors needs to be paid. The problem then becomes sometimes whether you are paying foreign contractors or paying local contractors. Local contractors put money back in the economy in terms of their dependent and spending in the system. Foreign contractors have taken money elsewhere that they need to take the money out of the system. You realize that even when you pay foreign contractors, you get the problem of the currency. Basically, the city depreciating because once people have cities in the system and they need to mop up dollars to take elsewhere, you're always going to have, that's why we have the telecos and all that, having that problem. So the balance as to who gets paid and when is really critical. So I pray and hope that they are going to pay this 80% so that this liquidity issue we are talking about, people can go and pay their banks so that the banks don't get collapsed, so that the banks will do their business, so that individuals can have the money to be able to pay their companies, can pay their workers, they can look after their wives and children, and money will go around. Money is like a blood in the economy. If it doesn't go around, Kojo, you are dead. That's what it is, basically.
Does that make it even more serious that over the past couple of days we're seeing what can only be described as evidence of a lack of interest in debating the budget by members of parliament?
It is obvious, and it's unfortunate. When I thought that the finance minister will probably live to regret this. You've got to be careful of choice of words. You don't rub things in people's faces. You don't tell people you've put money in their pocket when their pockets are empty. When you have laid people off as a result of banks collapse, people have lost their jobs and there's Christmas coming and they don't know what they are going to be doing with their family. When companies have collapsed as a result of the bad economy that we live in at the moment, and you claim that you put money in their pocket, what people are interested in, what jobs have you created? You say you do 1D, 1F. How many 1D, 1Fs have you created? Not how many pineapple juice you bring to Parliament to show us. But where are the actual jobs? The information minister, who has the power to be able to tell us what is going on, just comes and display a pineapple juice that is coming to a store near you. What people are interested in is which job is coming to the area near me, that I'm going to be able to work and earn a real wage, real job for real wage. When the SNAPCO going to turn into proper job and not a stopgap. These are the things we need to be thinking of as a country, and not just say that, you know, excuse my language, but in the world of blind people, one eye is the king.
But that is the nature.
And in that case, you know, in the absence of nothing, NAPCO is a welfare system. You've been in the UK. It's basically a welfare system that we are creating. And if you're not careful, you go down the road, you'll be creating a welfare society. Only a few people have actually got a real job they are doing. I think the GRAs and all that. The rest just show up to a place that they have been asked to go to and collect money at the end of the day. Welfare system is not a bad thing, but you need to be able to finance it, and you need to have a plan on how that is going to translate into job. If you are getting a job seekers allowance in the UK or somewhere, they put you in a room every week that you are going to sign up for your money to tell them what you have done to look for a job.
Yeah.
They have centers where you can go to computers and put your CV together and get guidance. So some kind of a process need to be taking place if you are in a transition state. Now, not just be boasting and say you've put money in people's pocket, but you don't tell them how much you've taken out of their pocket. I think my honorable brother Atu was coming up with some figures as to how much they've taken out of our pocket. You see, so you can't take with
something
one
like
hand.
15 billion or something like
Yes,
that.
I think the figure I had was 19, unless it's
19
gone up,
billion.
It's gone up since then. And the
19
government is
billion.
saying they put 12.2 billion in our pocket. So the question becomes, you are taking 19 billion from my pocket and putting 12.2. So you are not robbing Peter to pay Paul this time. You are robbing Peter to pay Peter.
Now, you talk about the fact that these are social interventions.
Yeah.
That's the word I was struggling for earlier. Is it not a bit of a surprise to hear a socialist party criticizing social interventions? That is the center of your ideology, is it not?
I'm not criticizing it. If you listen to me, I have consistently been talking about planning and execution. This is where the problem is with this government. They do the talk, but they can't walk the walk. You see, it is how you do things. I mean, countries are implementing social intervention and they are doing okay, though it costs them a lot of money. And I can agree with you that, you know, even though ideologically we have, if you NDC as a social democrat, you will say it's more an interventionist type of party. But the opposite side too have realized that these social interventions is actually the things that win you an election.
Yet
because
all they attract is criticism from the opposition.
No, it's not the criticism. You know, when you are doing something that is not your natural home, you are not going to do it well. So we are just pointing it. If you want to do this, even whether we have done it or we haven't done it, that is our natural home. We have some ideas to share with you on how we look. You cannot be somebody who thinks something, but you want to do something different. You need to know how it is done. Most of the things, free education is a fantastic thing. I have always held the belief that this country is endowed with a lot of natural resources and all the minerals that we have. How can the man on the street or the woman on the street say that the oil that comes in the western region in the sea benefits me directly? Yes, you can say it goes through the taxes. You can give them a long journey on how the money reaches them. But when you take free education, you can simply say that that is the money that pays your children school fees. We don't have any qualms about that. We just thought that it should be done progressively when you have the infrastructure to be able to house the children, give them a proper education in a comfortable environment, but not done haphazardly where you are giving people free education, they don't have a place to sleep, or the population is too much that you have to be running all sorts of shifts. Kids go home and get into all sorts of things and get pregnant, and the education, you know, messes up and all that. This is what we are talking about. So in the end, a good social policy can be a bad one if it is not planned and implemented properly. And I think that is where we are coming from.
Speaking of social interventions, Kayaye Hostel, good idea?
It's definitely any housing for the less privileged in society. It's a fantastic idea. Now, they say the sweetness of the pudding is in the eating. Let's just hope that it is not 1D, 1F, that every year they have to come and justify how many proposals have passed bankable stage and all that, yet you don't see anything. But you do see pineapple on parliament floor, where they tell you it's coming to a shop near you. Where it's coming from, you have no idea. I'm not challenging that it's not coming from a 1FDF or 1D1F place. But let's provide the jobs. Let's have social interventions that can be funded. Because one of the biggest problems in this country is being with subsidies. That in the end, everything can be subsidized. But the money has to come from somewhere. So even if you're a socialist or a social democrat, you will have to have the numbers to back what you are doing. And sometimes the numbers is become a bit problematic. I mean, just one example, I was looking into the budget, looking at, okay, how much money is available for capital expenditure? And in the budget, we have like 9.2 billion capital expenditure. Now, as you know, in a capital expenditure, the financing is actually broken into two. We have the foreign finance capital expenditure, which is basically projects that comes with money in terms of loans, like how Commander Sugar Factory was built, 35 million project, so you draw down. It's an Indian Exim facility, that sort of thing. And then you have the domestic one, which is basically ones that we have to find money for, usually comes from ADF, because you know, in the oil money, we split it into three, one to the consolidated, which is the ABF, and then the heritage and others. With the 9.2 billion, it splits as 3.7 in domestic funding, which is what we have to use money for, and 5.5 as in foreign finance, which is what comes with loans. So what we need to finance in this capital expenditure is actually 3.7. 3 billion of that money, according to this budget, is coming from the ABFA, which means that they are only left with 700 million to finance. Yet they are going for an euro bond, which they put at 17 billion. If you are going to get a 17 billion euro bond, which is about $3 billion US, you can do a lot with that money. And if you say you are going to use that to finance capital expenditure, yet you have only 700 million, then what are you going to do with the 16 billion that is left over? So I hope that they will have to come to Parliament to give us a breakdown on what that money will be used for when they eventually go for the Eurobond. So I would be interested to see the kind of allocation they do for the money, so that we know that the money is actually going to, because there's a lot of infrastructure to be done. And to be honest with you, the 9.2 billion is actually not enough. So if they can increase the spending and say that we are going to use this money to do that, maybe that's what they will pick. Another thing, if I'm to advise Kenoforiata, maybe he can pick some of his roads money from that Eurobond if he get the 3 billion.
Oh, there's an idea.
Yeah. Well, they were trying to, I think in the mid-year review, he actually came inviting us to join them in solving the currency issue, if you remember.
Yeah.
You know, they have the men, but obviously they realize that some men have to be contracted. So we are there to help them if they really need it.
Now let's go full circle, come back to this promise to not overspend in the coming year. And I mean, what we have seen, though, is that the amount that we are going to spend has gone up in comparison to last year.
Yeah.
Is that just a regular and expected, justifiable increase, or do you think that perhaps
in
already...
terms of expenditure?
The target, yes.
Yes. As I said, we've got to really... You know, we do all this rationalization, trying to cut things down and all that. But what I'm saying is that I think what we need to start looking, if the revenue is not coming, and we should do more on the revenue side, we should be looking at the performance of the things we are spending money on. How well are they doing? We gave this ministry this amount of money for this project. How many of these projects were completed? How many weren't? And why weren't they completed? If a project is a useful one and can benefit society, but then there were some impediments why that project was not completed because of lack of money, then those things can be justified for more money. If some were just useless projects that people were using it as part of the leakages and putting money in their pocket, then we must cut those. And I hope there will come to a day where the Ministry of Finance, in its budget hearing, will be moving. Now we have moved to program budgeting. I hope that we move into performance budgeting.
Indeed.
That it will be. But you know, you cannot spend money you haven't got. And the only way to do it for a developing country is to borrow money. But you have to borrow responsibly, not for recurrent expenditure, but for things that will expand your economy, so that you can get money to spend on things that you need to consume.
Right.
But until you have built a solid infrastructure, which sometimes is very difficult to juggle, in the sense that people will tell you, we don't need infrastructure. But you have no idea how roads eventually translate into food for you to eat.
That's right.
And those are the things that we need to think along with our people, for people to understand that we don't only do popularism by feeding you and leave the rains to hit you, because we are not interested in your house. When your belly is full, you are fine. But it's when the rain comes that you realize you need a roof over your head.
Right. Mr. Kweku Ricketts-Hagan, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for making the time to be with us here in the studio.
Happy to see you again.
Yes, me too.